So that brings us to brain research, the second category that is part of the biological justifications for the differences between women and men. Um, from studies trying to locate the source of women's emotions or men's anger to studies wondering if size or weight is more indicative of intelligence, we know that the discussions about brains and the differences between them are usually based simply on the differences versus looking for the similarities. And of course, when you're looking for differences, you'll find them. One of the reoccurring problems with scientific research at this time is selection bias. And if you set out trying to justify one particular perspective over another, and you allow those preconceived notions to impact the way that you do your research, then it's going to have impacts on your findings themselves. This emphasis on difference persists today, and it generally focuses on three areas: the right-left hemisphere difference, the connective tissue between hemisphere difference, and the different parts used for similar functions. As with these past studies, these derive from a standpoint of male superiority, comparing female brains with the male standard. Even more important, when identifiers of intelligence favor women, they are excused, explained socially, or changed. When studies change the focus or standard, the general theme tends towards the superiority of male brains. This is something we consistently see in this type of research. When the findings change, when the importance of the right hemisphere wanes and the importance of the left hemisphere waxes, then the positive characteristics of each hemisphere are attributed to males, not females. So when we think about this and we think about the original types of brain research, we're looking at really the type of research called craniology, which focused on finding differences between the sexes in terms of much more basic things: the ratio of the brain surface to the body surface, the ratio of brain weight to body weight, and exam scores and IQ tests. Much like the more recent data and studies, scientists have no problems changing their perspectives and attributing the more positive characteristics of whatever variables they're using to support male superiority. The contemporary research, of course, focuses on right-left hemispheres. It also focuses on the way males and females use different parts of their brains for similar functions, and it focuses on the tissue that connects the two hemispheres. Once again, when you're looking for differences, you will find them. If we focused on similarities and we admitted that we don't necessarily know how the brain actually works, it would be more informative as we move forward. So the idea of the differences between the hemispheres: the right and left sides of the brain have different cognitive functions. The right is more visual and spatial, where the left is more language and reading. Now this has changed over time, but what we do see is if at a particular time the right is considered more analytic, more mathematical, more successful, then it'll be attributed to male characteristics. If the left is considered to be more important for the same types of reasons, then it will be attributed to male superiority. Science has consistently shifted its perspective which once again is part of the reason why feminism has argued that male bias in the enterprise of science has skewed our results over time and left us with the inability to understand truly what's going on with brain function and whether there is determining factors within the brain that differentiate between males and females. Of course, problems with this research, which I've already talked about a few, you have to ask yourself which side is better and thus connected to men's dominance and power. As I said, things have changed over the course of our studies of the brain, and when things change at the expense of male superiority, then we just simply attribute the new characteristics to males. Another thing to consider is originally right hemisphere was locus of passion, mental illness, instinct, and thus associated with women. As I said, the characteristics of right and left have changed over time. And as you see, by the 1970s, the right hemisphere was hailed as the source of genius, creativity, and talent, and thus overwhelmingly masculine. So whatever hemisphere we're talking about, if it's positive, science historically has interpreted that as male characteristics, male superiority, and if it's negative, it's attributed it to women's inferiority, if you will. There's also the idea of lateralization. So if you don't buy into the hemisphere thing, then perhaps it's not about hemispheres, but about the ability to use both sides at once. Some research suggests that males use only one half of their brain for functions that women use both halves for. Other research indicates that men and women use different parts for the same tasks, like math. So you can just imagine the research that suggests that males use only one half of their brain for the functions that take females both halves of their brains to complete. Then you can see that this would fit into males being more superior. We only have to use one half of our brains for goodness sake, whereas you ladies, you have to use both sides of your brain to complete similar functions. Of course, there's problems with lateralization as well. Minor differences in males and females, infant brains can become major differences through differential socialization and the impact of culture. So if we start to identify differences early on in a child's life, then the socialization and the impact of cultural cues over the course of their life after we identify those characteristics will be very formative in how those children are produced and how the brain functions over time. The research often involves small samples, and researchers come to erroneous conclusions before ruling out confounding variables. This last point comes back to selection bias and the researchers' preconceived notions of what's going on and their willingness to settle on an erroneous conclusion even when there could be confounding variables to explain the phenomenon that they're explaining. And of course, there's the connections. Maybe it's not the hemispheres at all, but the connection between them. Could it be the corpus callosum, the splenium, or the amygdala, which is responsible for men being better at math and women being better with words and feelings? As I started this lecture, we have to be very clear that we don't know exactly what is going on with the brain. Now, as science moves forward, maybe it will give us some conclusions, some better conclusions on what's going on with brain chemistry and the use of one side of your brain versus the other side of your brain, the importance of the corpus callosum, the splenium, or the amygdala. But we just aren't clear with that right now. And I'm not sure that we ever will be. And of course, the problems with these connections, or with the idea of connections, is studies have been contradictory and opposite depending on the sample characteristics. Once again, we're talking about selection bias, possibly. Most of the research is done on animals, not humans. And this is extremely problematic, considering the impact of socialization and cultural cues in our environment. And then, of course, it ignores socialization in the ways in which we push boys and men to be good at math related to other activities, and girls and women to be better at speaking and addressing feelings. There's a significant body of research that says that that is not biological. It is social constructions over time, the cues that we give boys in their early years versus the cues that we give girls in their early years are very impacting in how they develop over time.